Okay, the spring is upon us, so it's time to review everything that happened during the winter. A lot happened. It's impossible to go through everything, but we'll focus, as always, at this intersection of marketing, data, privacy, and technology that we care about. So ePrivacy with both, the fines or enforcement and then legal updates. Then we'll move on to MarTech and AdTech. Then we'll move on to, after that, to AI competition and digital markets. The next block is pets and zero-party data. And finally, future of media. I'm doing this one by myself today. I'll make sure that next time that's not the case. So I'm hoping not to annoy you by using another text to AI. I'm using 11 Labs this time, and I'll rely on a voice called Alice. I hope it doesn't get on your nerves, and I'll try not to abuse it, to simply maintain the pace and the rhythm with the tool. And that way you can also escape my accent for a few seconds. All right, let's get started. And the first block is enforcement.
On December 5th, the French Data Protection Agency imposed a fine of €240,000 on Casper after it scraped personal data from 160 million linked profiles.
And we had an interview about this with Jorge Cabet in the Spanish channel about the entire wider dilemma of data scraping, right? And personal data scraping, which many people have written about. Anyway, it's in another channel in Spanish. Again, more.
On December 12th, the same agency issued a formal notice to website owners about the use of dark patterns in cookie consent banners.
That's it. And it is expected that the CNIL, the French Data Protection Agency, will be enforcing the ePrivacy Directive even more, right? It will remain a priority. More things. On December 17th, the Irish DPC fined Meta $251 million for a data breach affecting 29 million accounts in that breach, and that was a long time ago anyway, over 5 years ago, but now it's when the fine hit. On December 18th, so the following day, the Dutch DPA fined Netflix, and it was a 5 million fine for failing to provide sufficient information on how it processes the personal data about its subscribers. Then more things moving into the new year.
On January 13th, Texas's Attorney General announced a lawsuit against Allstate for a breach of the state's new Data Privacy and Security Act by collecting geolocation and movement data across multiple third-party mobile apps through an embedded SDK.
More things.
On January 16th, the FTC banned General Motors from selling driving data to consumer reporting agencies for 5 years after discovering that the company was collecting and selling precise geolocation data and driving behavior information from millions of vehicles without adequately notifying consumers and obtaining their affirmative consent.
That's it. There's been plenty of cases involving cars. And even in California, it seems to be a priority these days, as we'll see later on. And so we discussed the application of privacy by design to connected cars, EVs, and so on, with Mark Jaffe.
On January the 30th, the Italian Data Protection Agency ordered DeepSeek to stop processing personal data about Italian individuals.
And in the UK?
On February 1st, after an ICO action in September against the same company for serving cookies without consent, a High Court judge in England ruled against Sky Betting and Gaming for unlawfully targeting a problem gambler.
That's it. Then on February 5th, a first class action against X, so former Twitter, and TikTok was announced in Germany, only 3 days after the EU AI Act prohibitions entered into force. The first prohibitions, right? And the case was led by Peter Hense, who has been a guest of this podcast in the past. More things in Spain.
On February 6th, Spain's Data Protection Agency fined the insurer Generali with €5 million for a 2022 data breach that had affected 1.6 million people.
Yes, moving on through February, Amazon Ads and also Amazon were sued for the data collection and sharing happening in its SDK, in the Amazon Ads SDK, which is embedded in many free mobile apps in the US, like and beyond, like the Weather app, like Offer app, like Speed Test, and many other apps. So this was, in fact, the first class action filed under Washington State's My Health, My Data Act, right? And others as well. And so I'm not going to bore you with it because we have a full episode on this one with Mike Hintz. Okay, then on March 4th, in Spain, back in Spain, the AEPD fined La Liga, which runs Spain's football or soccer league, right, 1 million euros for biometric access, or for the way they handled these, processing of biometric data to access the stadiums, the football stadiums, the soccer stadiums. And according to the authority, La Liga, of course, was trying to keep tabs on football hooligans, but according to them, there wasn't even a DPIA, right, to ponder the risks. And they even relied on the consent legal basis to process that personal data. And in fact, the only way to access the stands was by giving consent. So a clear show that consent was not the right legal basis either. More things. Now, back to the US.
On March 12th, the California CPPA fined Honda $632,500 for breaching the CCPA by requiring consumers to provide excessive personal information, even as part of their opt-out requests, and using a privacy rights management platform that did not offer symmetrical choices.
And then crossing the pond again, the CNIL, so in France, will start an enforcement sweep of mobile applications in the coming few weeks, so in the spring, after releasing a set of guidelines for mobile app developers, publishers, and SDK providers. So SDKs, as you see, are all over the place in these past few weeks. Now, moving on to legal updates and guidelines.
On October 10th, the US Department of Justice adopted a rule preventing the transfer of sensitive personal data about US citizens to people and entities with connections to China, Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Russia, or Venezuela.
That's it. The rule will become enforceable on April 8th. We discussed its implications with Mike Hintz in the same episode that, where we cover the My Health, My Data Act updates on this channel. More things.
On December 18th, the EDPB released its opinion on certain data protection aspects related to the processing of personal data in the context of AI models.
We also went to this. This has paved the way for plenty of literature, and we covered this first with interviews with Loke Murel, Jorge García Herrero, and Kerry Lenning. And then we've got another interview coming up with Theodore Christakis, reflecting on the whole thing and its aftermath. So the aftermath of the opinion and everything that's followed, with a little more perspective. More things.
On January 8th, in Bindel versus the EU Commission, the General Court awarded non-material damages as a result of an international data transfer.
That's it. What's unique is that non-material damages, right, again, have been awarded. And this is quite unique in the European context. So perhaps this will open the door to this sort of claim in future class actions. We'll see. More things.
On January 17th, the EU's Digital Operational Resilience Act, or DORA, entered into force across the region, imposing strict new security requirements on banks and other financial services providers.
Yes, and we had an interview with Maria Vidal on the Spanish channel about this law that we call DORA as well. Then on January 23rd, the UK ICO published its 2025 strategy for online tracking, and it announced, so the ICO, a specific focus on online advertising. So we'll stay tuned. Then the first prohibitions and also the AI literacy obligations under the EU AI Act became enforceable on February the 2nd. Then 2 days later, on February 4th, the EU Commission released its guidelines on prohibited AI practices under the EU AI Act, right? And that was followed then by another set of guidelines which were fine-tuning the definition of AI systems. This is why then we had that class action that I referred to earlier, right? Against X and TikTok. We had an interview with Markus Winschelbaum here covering these things. Then on February 6th, The Attorney General's opinion in the EDPS versus SRB, or the Single Resolution Board case, which started when Santander Bank bought Banco Popular in Spain, was released, and it reinforced the theory laid out in previous big cases when it comes to defining or to drawing the line between anonymous data and pseudonymized data, like the Breyer case, right? And the Scania case. So that threshold, it's something that we keep struggling with. It's a key piece of every data protection program, privacy program. And so it simply repeated this idea that if the recipient of the data, of the encrypted data, has no access to the key, to the recipient, that data is not personal data. More things.
On February 27th, the CJEU ruled in the CK case regarding transparency obligations concerning the logic involved in automated decisions.
In essence, the explanation provided, so under, again, this is all Article 22 GDPR, right? So the explanation for that automated processing, that must allow the data subject, it said, so the CJEU, it must allow data subject to both understand it and challenge it. And if there's trade secrets involved, which was the case, right, if they're at risk, then the data controller should involve the supervisory authority or the courts, so they can help strike the right balance, right? But it cannot use that as an excuse.
An open EDPB consultation on its latest guidelines for data anonymization ended on March 14th.
Okay, moving on to MarTech AdTech. On February the 5th, Meta launched its own, we could call it a CDP with some data cleanroom capabilities. I'm not sure yet. It's called Signals Gateway. And it shows how saturated the first-party data management space has become, even though it makes sense that the walled gardens have their own thing. Amazon had one, Google has one. And so at the same time, the independent CDP, customer data platform space, has witnessed a lot of consolidation in the past 3 months. So we saw ActionIQ being acquired, Lytix being acquired, mParticle being acquired, and also by companies that were mostly unrelated. So from out of this world of MarTech, from my point of view. So there's a general perception that customer data platforms have fallen short of their expectations. And we had an interview on the subject, on this debate, with Matthew Niederberger, right? More things.
On February 12th, Google announced that it would limit the matching window of customer match features in its Google Ads and DV360 platforms to 540 days.
Yes, and in parallel, the company, this is important, has been rolling out confidential matching, right? So if you use customer match with these new conditions now, if you use that, then now you'll be pushed into confidential matching, which instead of, letting people directly upload a CSV with all the personal data in there, it works a bit more like a data clean room. It uses confidential computing, so trusted execution environments like the ones we covered in our interviews here in the past. For example, the one with Decentric, which uses that kind of PET in a data clean room environment. Anyway, Google is doing that now, moving people towards that space. Again, data does not reach Google in its original form, proper personal data. Instead, there's that deduplication, that matching is happening in a sort of secure intermediate space. More things.
On February 16th, Google modified its platform program policies to allow the use of IP addresses for fingerprinting purposes. The ICO warned the company that it would be closely monitoring its implications.
Yes, and there's a lot to say about this. So we had an interview with Daniel Rosenzweig here, again, on this channel. So you can go back and listen to it. So moving on to AI competition and digital markets. And here I'll try and give you an overview because there's a lot to it. So on December 26th, DeepSeek launched V3, right? That's an LLM that it's equivalent to OpenAI's GPT-4o or Claude 3.5 in Anthropic, or Llama 3.1, or Qwen 2.5 in Alibaba. And the impressive thing is that the company claimed to have spent very little money, right? A little more than $5 million in its training, which is like 100th of the budget used by the big AI giants, right, in the US. That was one thing. Then on January 20th, we saw DeepSeek launch R1 and R10, and these are open source reasoning models, right? So they are equivalent to OpenAI's O1, right? And in the paper they explained they had removed human feedback from the reinforcement learning phase. And then the company released both an R1-powered chatbot, so a website, a public website, and an API. And that got them into a lot of trouble, because one thing is release a model that anyone can download and safely deploy in their own servers, which is welcome. Another one is that then they got carried away and the servers were in China, and it was all a big problem. And that's why, the Garante action, the Italian data protection intervention that we mentioned earlier. But then, on February 2nd, OpenAI released Deep Research, which is a multi-step research tool for complex tasks. And this is built on the company's new reasoning model. So if DeepSeek's R1 and R10 were equivalent or were on par to O1, then OpenAI released O3. And there's no O2 because there's a big telco company in Europe, right, called O2. So they skipped that one and they went straight for O3. Perplexity released its own deep research tool with the same name. Google released the same thing, a research tool, step-by-step research tool called also Deep Research. On February 17th, xAI released Grok 3 and Grok 3 Think, which is its own reasoning model, also trained through reinforcement learning, together with a deep search offering, which is equivalent to the deep research of the other three. On March the 8th, a new Chinese AI startup showed up and made a lot of noise and released a new AI agent, and that's called Manos. It was made widely available and it made a lot of noise. It's been all the rage. Then on March 11th, OpenAI released its own Agents SDK for third parties to build their own agents, their own operators, as they call them, on top of OpenAI. And more things.
On February 11th, a federal district court in Delaware denied the fair use exception to the use of Westlaw's copyrighted headnotes when processing a large collection of real court cases. This is what a new AI startup was doing in order to directly compete with Westlaw.
That's it. And this is one of the first cases that deals with fair use in the context of generative AI, even though we've been talking about it for a long time. We had an episode here with Jacob Plessner talking about copyright exceptions for generative AI already, in February 23. But this time, its conclusions may not have so much impact outside the specific context. I mean, they are direct competitors, and there seems to be bad faith on the part of the startup, which is called Ross. They had opened a Westlaw account through an intermediary after Thomson Reuters, which is the owner of Westlaw, declined to license its database to them. So there's plenty of nuances that perhaps make it not so applicable to other things beyond this very specific scenario. More things.
As of February 21st, Apple iCloud backups, through its advanced data protection feature, can no longer be end-to-end encrypted in the UK after the government chose to enforce the country's Investigatory Powers Act.
So moving on to pets and zero-party data, we had an interview with Jamie Smith, always entertaining, always inspiring, and we were talking about AI agents, but from the point of view of personal agency, of real zero-party data, of people in control of their preferences, their needs, so the world adapts to us as individuals, right? And that's a more utopic, if you want, more optimistic perspective of agents, which of course I do want to believe in. But that was before some of the more popular agents even saw the light. So Jamie did anticipate there was going to be this advent of agents, and that's what happened. There was OpenAI with Operator, Perplexity, which we mentioned with Comet, this agentic web browser. And then, of course, Salesforce is pushing hard with this Agent Force, this framework for people to build their agents. And in fact, Gan Diaz, who's been here with us, he's written a book, and I'm really eager to talk to him about it. So this is an open invitation to you, Gam, to join me and discuss your new book on Agent Force and agents. The last one to join the party is Meta, which on March 4th released what they called Business AI to lower the costs in customer support, automating customer service through a chatbot that is also a kind of agent, and it will do plenty of things in a chain of events. And I don't know what else because I haven't seen it in action, but it's another one. I'm sure that has nothing to do with zero-party data and control, but it is in the space. And regarding pets or privacy-enhancing technologies, we had an interview on the Spanish channel with Nuria Ruiz, who works at Netflix. Before that, she was at Wikipedia. And we discussed privacy engineering and lean analytics. I met Nuria at Pepper, which is this privacy engineering conference in Santa Clara. And I think she'll be hosting or co-hosting that one again this year. And then moving on to the future of media.
On November 29th, Australian privacy law amendments and social media age restrictions enacted, with a minimum age requirement of 16 prior to joining certain networks.
And we had an interview with Alex Dietel, who's a lawyer based in Melbourne, in Australia, covering recent developments in the country. To finish, there was this big issue in December in Romania with the election results being cancelled, the government blaming TikTok, the risk of extending or applying the DSA or the Digital Services Act to fight misinformation, and in the process perhaps invading freedom of speech, a very hot debate, especially after the new US Vice President blamed European governments for precisely letting this control of misinformation override freedom of speech. This is a big story. So Lucas Olejnik, who was here in the show, wrote a book about this whole thing called Propaganda, dealing with misinformation. And he's been writing here and there about how sometimes governments would exaggerate the risk for their benefit, right? So it is a very interesting debate. Anyway, there's that interview that we did. The last thing I'll say here in Future of Media is there's a new Instagram alternative called Flashes that sits on top of Blue Sky's AT protocol. I find it very appealing. I hope there's more things like this, just like we have Blue Sky. I hope there's more of these things, and we're not all trapped within 3 or 2 platforms for everything with all its consequences, right? So that's inspiring. Let's see. With this, I thank you for your time, and this is it for our winter newsroom.